Okay, everyone, we're going to proceed. Welcome to our virtual conference today. And our conference, I went ahead before, so forgive me. Here we go again. And this workshop will be on understanding the impact of racial trauma on Black and racialized youth. And we will explain, define, racialize as we go ahead. We would like to pay homage to the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge we're hosted on the lands of the Mississaugas of Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and the Inuit people. We ask that you think about where you're situated at this moment and which lands you're on and which treaties are for those peoples.
Okay, and I will do the Emancipation Day acknowledgement of slavery. August 1st was proclaimed Emancipation Day, a day on which we recognize the abolition of slavery in Canada and acknowledge the significant and outstanding historical and current contributions of Black Canadians. The national recognition of Emancipation Day is a critical opportunity to increase awareness of Canada's complicity in slavery, racial segregation.
Forgive me, sorry.
Okay, racial segregation and marginalization that has devastating impacts on multiple generations of people of African descent. It also calls upon us to understand slavery as part of Canada's project of nation building and colonialism. We're going to show a map of the demographics of the population of Blacks in Canada with the concentration in Ontario and Quebec. And just as a note, before our country known as Canada, we were French colonies and British colonies, New France and British North America. Black and white loyalists fought with the British against Americans and were given freedom in Canada. And as well, Emancipation Day, the legality is recognizing Emancipation Day to commemorate the end of legal slavery in Canada. And it also brings awareness to Canadians to recognize we're not just, as some would say, playing the race card. These are things that actually happened, and it's also an important opportunity for learning. And, if we fail to learn history, we're doomed to repeat it, as Winston Churchill had stated.
Thank you. And so for today's session, we'll be looking at what is the foundational knowledge of racial stress and racial trauma. We're looking at common language, current language that is being used. What is our cultural understanding of mental health, mental stress, and mental illness, and unpacking misunderstanding and stigma within our own communities. As I said, the current language of what is mental health and well-being, and the concept of social determinants of health. What is the social current components of social determinants of health, and factors that contribute to racial trauma, such as racism and discrimination. And we will also look at suggested strategies for healing, support, coping, and reaching out.
Okay. And just some questions around cultural understanding of mental health and well-being and trauma. What is your family's understanding of mental health issues or mental illness? Did your family's cultural background impact that understanding of mental health and mental illness? And please feel free to unmic and speak, or just put it in, a question or comment in the chat. And then question 2 is, what kind of explanations were used? I.e., it's supernatural, it's out of, the person's out of their mind, or, they lack motivation, they need to pick up their bootstraps, nothing's wrong with them, or they're playing or acting out for attention.
So if you care to share, I will go first. I'm actually Caribbean. I'm Afro-Caribbean Canadian. So I'm from Jamaica, and I'm from the interior of the country area. And so I grew up with families saying, don't go close to that crazy man, they will hurt you. Or they would have an explanation based in the supernatural that, it's somebody or ghost did something to someone or breathed on them, and that's why they went crazy. So that was my understanding from my own cultural family's background about what mental illness and mental health was. Anyone else care to share if you're from and not because I've had, as a Caribbean person, we do have many races in the Caribbean. They may also have a different cultural notion of mental illness and wellness. Okay, so we'll just move right along. So when we talk about common language or current language to explain mental illness or mental health, we have now a continuum where we look at using the phrase or the language of good mental health and low mental health or poor mental health, and on the continuum of severe mental illness to no mental illness. And in promoting this new language and promoting good mental health, you know, we also want to know that someone could have severe mental illness and still have good mental health if they follow the preventative practice in the treatment, such as seeing a therapist or psychiatrist or their doctors, taking medication, you know, getting good sleep and exercise, and having good support systems around them, whether it be family or friends or spiritual support or doing meditative practices, then that will contribute to their good mental health. And there are individuals without mental illness that have poor mental health because of maybe unhealthy relationships, not caring for themselves, not eating well. So that's the common language that is now currently being used to understand mental health and wellness. I wanted to point out that at TDSB, we are centering equity and mental health, understanding that there is an intersection between learning, equity, and mental health. But we also saw that COVID-19, now we're in 20 months of the pandemic, how it magnified racial injustices, inequities also in healthcare, and the disproportionate impact of these inequities on Indigenous, Black, LGBTQ, and racialized youth, people of color. And so the BIPOC, meaning Black, Indigenous, and people of color, could be people of color, Southeast Asian, Latinos, I say Latinos, and a lot of my friends from the Philippines. I can't say that. Anyways, I'm so sorry. They don't identify as South Asians, but from the Philippines. So anyone that's in the spectrum of brown is referred to as people of color. So, you know, students who are racialized may be faced with additional challenges, including racism. And so once again, I spoke about the intersectionality of equity and mental health. So the concept of social determinants of health, we see that, you know, there is an intersection of the experience of mental health issues and inequities. And so it is well established that some groups, as stated in society, experience social and economic disadvantages due to the unequal distribution of power, wealth, privilege, and resources. And so that encompasses, you know, the social determinants of health both determines and deepens inequity. So some of the social equities that impact on stress, we can see it's large, but it's the reality for people, right? Covert or overt racism, students with special education needs, intergenerational trauma, we'll talk about that, disability, marginalized communities where there's not a lot of resources, patriarchy, white supremacy and colonialism trying to disrupt the inequities that we see, the hate and the bias, LGBTQ, hate and bias, access to support and technology. And during COVID, the assumption that those in marginalized communities will have access to Wi-Fi or have the extra economic or resources to have laptops. Yes, schools were providing that, but there are a lot of family members that didn't have the access to the Wi-Fi or the knowledge of how to use technology. Excuse me. We see anti-Semitism, we see anti-East Asian, anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous and Islamophobia. We also see anti-Palestinian hate. And so, you know, these impact on the mental health and well-being of students and individuals. And Marie, can you take over? I need to.
Sure. So if we look at racial trauma defined, races and what racial trauma is, one definition is that race-based traumatic stress injury is defined as emotional and psychological trauma caused by discrimination and racist and racism that elicits responses comparable to those associated with post-traumatic stress injury, right? So when we look at the emotional and psychological impact, we're looking at things that are internal, right? Because you can't see, well, you can see the emotional impact, but the psychological impact comes out differently. And so we do see that, trauma does impact our students, and I'm going to speak from students emotionally and psychologically. Um, Another definition is that racial trauma is the ongoing result of racism, racist bias, and exposure to racist abuse in the media. Racial trauma can affect many aspects of a person's life, including their ability to have relationships, concentrate on school or work, and feel safe. And that's as defined by the medicalnewsday.com. If we look at, the past year and what has occurred with George Floyd and the, quote, awakening of looking at racism and trauma and the language that is coming out, we can see how the ongoing result of racism is the exposure, right? Looking at George Floyd, I remember for myself how it impacted me for days. I was immobilized by watching it over and over and over again. It really impacted my ability to get up. I was lethargic, unfocused. I didn't want to do anything. I just wanted to sit on my couch and be in my thoughts of all the things that have occurred in my life. So it triggered my own trauma based on race.
Mhm. We also see the concept of race-based traumatic stress, which is now known in the medical field as RBTS, refers to the mental and emotional injury caused by encounters with racial bias and ethnic discrimination, racism, and hate crime. So any individual that has experienced an emotionally painful, sudden, and uncontrollable racist encounter is at risk of suffering from a race-based stress injury. And when looking at the definition that is currently being used in language, in institutions, and in treatment centers, the fact that it's emotional injury is the new language that we need to really center ourselves in, center our language and dialogue so that we can teach our youth and young adults the language that they need to be immersed in to be able to know how to learn how to cope. So the types of racial trauma symptoms, emotional and internal, we have depression, we have anxiety, we have the hypervigilance, the increased alertness, being suspicious, not trusting, looking around, a sense of hopelessness, the reluctant to interact or to trust anyone from the privileged dominant culture. And we see that, with the somatic symptoms, we have headaches, I'm sorry, not we, individual experiencing race-based trauma and stress may suffer from headaches, sleep difficulties, body aches and pain, digestive issues, and poor memory recall. And Anne-Marie, you had a great example of poor memory recall connection. Can you speak to that?
Sorry?
You had a great example with the poor memory recall when someone is really stressed, especially students.
Yes, one of the things working in the school, I find that sometimes kids, when they are overwhelmed, um, they are unable to focus, right? So sometimes we forget that kids go through stress, that they are also affected by racial trauma. They are the intergenerational racial trauma that they experience that comes down through their parents. They are in school, and so they oftentimes will tune out, right? So we'll see the behavior, but the behavior is not the issue. It's all of the other stuff that's going on for them, and so they will they'll just tune out. I hope that's what you were asking
Yes,
me,
that's
Lonnie.
what,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
exactly. And as social workers, when we work with these students, we will ask them, what happened? How are you feeling? Let's talk about it instead of just judging. Why are you not concentrating? You are this, you are that. So that's the strategy that we hope to impart today. And so we do have a video to show about racism and mental health. And it's about a 4 or 5 minute video.
Racism and mental health are connected in many ways. This video will discuss the impact on people and communities who are targets of racism. Around the world, Black, Indigenous, and people of color are the target of prejudice, systemic discrimination, microaggressions, and physical acts of violence due to the color of their skin. Experiences of racism not only cause distress in the moment, but can also lead to mental health issues that become more severe with each experience. Let's review some of the immediate and long-term effects of racism. During and immediately after experiencing racism, the fight or flight nervous system response may be activated. This survival response prepares people to respond to threats in the environment and can include anxiety or stress, a faster heartbeat, sweating, nausea, and racing thoughts. People can also experience sadness, anger, and have a lowered sense of self-worth and confidence. Over time, the cumulative effect of racism can cause chronic stress and a heightened stress response, poor overall mental health and physical health issues. Experiencing racism can contribute or lead to symptoms of depression, anxiety, and PTSD. It can also cause hypertension and other cardiovascular problems, relationship difficulties, trouble with school or work performance, and an overall reduced sense of well-being. People do not have to be the direct target of interpersonal acts of racism to experience its harmful effects. Research shows that being a part of a marginalized group in and of itself is a source of stress. Witnessing oppression or violence towards individuals from one's community can cause vicarious trauma and even symptoms associated with post-traumatic stress disorder. This is often widespread after instances of racist violence make national headlines. The economic and emotional impact of dehumanization and victimization can be passed down over generations. The ripple effects of history are still impacting many people in the present day. People from marginalized communities are not only more likely to experience mental health issues due to social determinants and institutionalized racism, they are less likely to have access to treatment for their concerns. It's clear that increasing access to mental health care is vital to promote the health and wellness of everyone. So, how do we make changes? No one individual alone can be responsible for effecting change. Positive change and healing requires a conscious effort from everyone. When it comes to such a widespread and ingrained problem such as racism, making a positive change requires us all to be a part of the solution. We all greatly benefit when the lives of everyone are valued and people can live out their full potential. We must educate ourselves on the history of racism and unlearn many things that are presented as truth by the dominant culture. Take initiative and do research. There are many books, websites, training, and other resources to help you on your journey. Don't place the burden of the time and emotional labor of this education on already burdened people from marginalized communities. When you see acts of racism, call it out and call people in to have meaningful conversations about the impact of their words and actions. Let's all work together to support mental health for all and make our world a more equitable and inclusive place.
Bear with me, please. Actually, I'm going to stop this video right now. Can you let us know in the chat or just unmute. Have you ever seen this video? What is your one takeaway from seeing the impact of racism on mental health? If you'd like to take a moment. If anyone has a comment. Okay, we'll continue on. So as we saw in the previous slide and in the video, when we see re-traumatizing events on the media, or when we see or hear of violence or hurts of people of a certain group, this is what we call collective trauma, a traumatic psychological effect shared by a group of people of any size, or it could be individuals, a country, it could be globally, up to and including society. And so, during COVID, Anne-Marie and I, as racialized workers, we were very fatigued with staff looking to us for support. Also, they were checking in with us, but it was very hard for us to speak because the collective trauma was so much for us, but we also knew that we had to be there for our students and to be able to explain some of the hurts and the harms and the uncomfortable feeling that they had in their bodies that they didn't have words to describe. So I see in the chat, I have not seen this particular video, but the impact is that it's so generational, correct, and affects the nervous system directly, you're correct. And it might even be hard to pinpoint, absolutely. And this is why we're doing this workshop. So as we saw, the racial trauma affects the body, just to summarize, fight or flight, or a disconnect from the body, which is a way for the body to protect itself. In clinical terms, that disconnect can be as severe as to be referred to as disassociation, decreased sense of personal safety, sometimes even as adults, depending on where you are. The Black, Indigenous, LGBTQ, or people of color might be in situations or environments where you don't feel safe. And that personal safety leads to a sense of hopelessness, right? And racism is both interpersonal and systemic. Interpersonal meaning individual relationship between people and communication between individuals. So for the student having a relationship with peers in the school or in the community, or a teacher-student relationship, an adult-student relationship, or adult and adult. Anger and hypersensitivity to being disrespected, being suspected at all angles. And sometimes people don't understand the concept of disrespect. There is a scholar by the name of Dr. Joy DeGray, and she really explained the concept of disrespect. And I'm reading a quote where she said, a lot of Black and racialized people have the right to be angry. The core of anger is disrespect. The past history has affected how Black and racialized people have experienced and expressed anger. Multiple microaggressions, personal indignity, disrespect can lead to being humiliation, frustration, and belittling. And the history of colonization legacy of being dehumanized by larger society around them makes individuals feel disrespected. There's a comment in the chat. Okay. As a white passing person and a parent to a mixed and Black child, it's my intention to continue to learn and unlearn. That's amazing for the sake of myself. Exactly. We need allies. We do need allies, and we'll talk more about that.
And if I could just, sorry, Imani, just wanted to go back to, because I think that was a really powerful statement that you read in terms of the core of anger is disrespect. And if we look at my work and our work, more so my work now in the schools with youth, you will oftentimes see that they're angry because they'll say, Miss, he disrespected me, right? Or the teacher expects me to respect her or him when they don't respect me. So respect is really an integral part of the hurt. And so I think it's really important to understand that, you know, the core of anger comes from disrespect when we're looking at racialized youth.
And one of the reasons why we're doing this workshop is, even in my research, I now have historical context and language to explain why disrespect is an issue, right? So how do we teach the young people that the historical context of being dehumanized, being, you know, subjected to racism with so much injustice and not being heard, all culminates to being disrespected. And that's where that anger comes from. So if we can give them an understanding of the layers of language to understand what they're feeling in their body, that is it would be more empowering for them to describe.
And that's the intergenerational trauma, right? Because
Exactly.
it's seeping down from one generation to the next.
To the other.
Because oftentimes I think teachers won't understand that in terms, or individuals, even as parents, you know, oh, you didn't experience that. So what is your problem? Let it go, right?
Exactly.
And no, it is learned. It is seeped down. It may not even be through words, but just through actions that it's learned, right?
And it's coming from somewhere.
Yes.
It's not just a notion or a statement. So yes. And also the reliance on old coping mechanism. When you know, youth and adults are feeling threatened and unsafe, which would not be helpful. How do we teach how to cope with racial trauma? And so having common language and understanding the current language to describe experiences and feelings is what we're getting at. So we need to teach young people, even in elementary school, the language of advocacy, what we're talking about. They're never too young to understand this. And also for young people and professionals who really don't have this language to really understand. So, and Marie, there's some comments in the chat if you'd care to read.
Okay, sorry, I was out.
No, that's okay. That's okay.
Yep, somebody said they hadn't seen that particular video, but the impact is that it's so generational and affects. Okay, so you read that.
Yeah.
Someone said thanks for this presentation and all of the emotional labor. Thank you. It's powerful, and I'm a somatic therapist. This is the exact context that I believe needs to take to the forefront in schools. Yes.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we're going to move on, and thank you for your comment. And so I want to talk about putting this in context to Toronto, that TDSB and Toronto Public Health, they recognize and acknowledge that racism impacts mental health and well-being. And on March 2nd, 2020, the year of COVID, they acknowledge Black Mental Health Day. And so for the next few slides, I'm going to speak about the content of TDSB and Toronto Public Health and their declaration. And so now March 1st to March 5th will be Black Mental Health Week. So during that week, whether you work in institutions or in the community, how can we honor the resiliency and the excellence and the history of Black and racialized? And I'm going to also include Indigenous, right? Because we do have the intersectionality of some people that are Black and Indigenous, or Black or Asian or East Asian. And so they have identities that also need to be celebrated. Anti-Black racism is prevalent in our society and has negative impacts. So now it's being acknowledged by public health in Toronto and Ontario, and by TDSB and other agencies. Research is increasing. And although we as a race and as a community and we are resilient, because historically we were not meant to be free. Before we were stolen and were enslaved, we were dehumanized as properties. We did not have legal rights. So we would have, enslaved would have been inherited by dominant societies, families. So to teach Black history in terms of the resilience of a people that fought for freedom, and that we are here on the backs of our foreparents, that is resiliency. So Black history is just not images of enslaved people in chains. It's about who are the freedom fighters in other parts of the world, in different countries. And, you know, there is a saying that, you know, we're dispersed all over the world, depending on where these slave ships let you off, right? So the experience, the collective trauma of that experience is there. On On top of that, Black Torontonians cannot easily access culturally appropriate mental health services, because we know that institutionally, most of the mental health services is very Eurocentric, right? It really doesn't really take into consideration the diversity and experiences. We are a multicultural society, but are those cultures widely a part of the treatment modules? CAMH is doing amazing research, and really looking at cultural specific brief solution therapy, looking at their SPACY program, Black mental health and addictions program, their outreach workers to reach out to marginalized youth. So there are a lot of agency, CAFCAN, they're doing a lot of work to provide culturally responsive support in the community. And so I just spoke about that. They also look at how to address racial and systemic barriers, is raising awareness. And that's one of the reasons why we're doing this workshop. And having the tough conversations. For the person in this room that spoke about, being of mixed race and having a mixed race child, is about how do we have the tough conversation, regardless of race, about inclusivity, and really providing the healing space for our youth to just talk and vent without repercussions of judgment and retaliation. We just need to have that very restorative space to enfold them in a caring environment, a caring circle, for them just to talk, to cry, and to be heard, and to feel accepted. And that we need to find spaces for that, more spaces, working together to build strong communities. Communities could be in school, out of school, in our own respective communities, and our family communities. And sometimes our families are not blood families, but those of like mind. And being true allies. We do know the performative allyship. We're talking about true allies, those that will speak out and not be bystanders, those that will create the space for racialized and Black people to have the voice, for their voices to be heard. And so I wanted to point out that, studies have shown that witnessing or being targeted, a target of anti-Black racism throughout a person's lifespan, right? Affects our mental health and well-being. And this is where intergenerational trauma comes in. That, as Anne-Marie said, you can witness your parents, your grandparents, your fathers, experiencing these traumas, right? There's no need for words, and that's internalized. The shame, the hate, and unhealthy relationship, right? And then that's passed on. How do we break that cycle of intergenerational trauma? And so, the studies also show right here in the city of Toronto, there's a mass distrust of institutions, and Black and racialized youth are often scrutinized in their daily life, in workplaces. As a professional racialized person, I'm scrutinized. I'm not exempt from that, and Marie's not exempt from that, in schools and public spaces, or doing interactions with public institutions. So, I really wanted to center this slide in discussing that. Race-based stress and pressures. We'll just go through this. We talked about this a little bit. Race-based stress and pressure result in feeling the need to practice extra vigilance to ensure their safety. It's hard for youth in the community to ensure their safety, right? And Marie, I think you had some great examples about this too. And so feeling the need to ensure their own safety in ways of, connecting with individuals or groups that may be toxic or unhealthy, but that's the only way that they may feel safe. And it puts extraordinary demands on their capacity to be resilient, to really cope. And so they may look to groups or individuals to feel safe, but it may not in the long term be the best relationship or connection for them. And so these connections or these experiences lead to, or add to existing mental health issues such as depression and anxiety, as discussed. So, from all angles, there's so many components to race-based stress and trauma, right? And unfortunately, mental illness or mental unwellness or poor mental health is often overlooked right? And have increased rates of misdiagnosis in institutions, undertreatment, or failure to diagnose. But we do know that there's an overrepresentation of Black, Indigenous, and racialized youth in the criminal system or the criminal justice system. So then, we'll be talking about Dr. Ken Hardy, where he says, when we're working with racialized youth or Black and Indigenous youth, we don't ask about what happened or to hear their stories. We're just quick to be punitive and consequence, and the healing never occurs. They're not given opportunities for healing.
Okay, so just to check in, and again, feel free to unmic or to put a comment in the chat box. One, is this new information? Are you learning anything new, or is something that you'd not heard before, a term, or just in terms of the conversation? Are the definitions of racism and racial trauma what you expected? And, as well, what was the one thing that you learned from this session?
From the first part.
Yeah.
I guess it's the end of the day. So maybe
yes.
people are tired, so let's go through. We won't wait. Yes. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that I really appreciate this conversation. Thank you. It's Petya speaking. And this is, for me, not new information because I've been actively learning and putting myself into these uncomfortable conversations just because they're needed. I am the mother of, again, a mixed child and a stepchild. I like to call her my bonus child because she's not really step, who's Black. And I've actually had to have these very difficult conversations with my own family members, about just, and to me, I know, so here's where some of these things get really difficult, because I know for some of them, it's not an intentional thing, but it's the ability to point out, for example, what they're saying with their words that could be very offensive in certain circles, right? And how it's not okay to do that. And I feel like I've always known this. I've always been that person. But in the last little while, something happened where I literally cannot not point it out. And it has resulted in not speaking to friends, to, kind of creating some really big distances between family members until, they're willing and ready to have actual educational conversations and discussions, not just feel like they're being attacked. So I appreciate this so much from, learning from all these perspectives, because when we talk about the school system, to me, inclusivity is an experience, and safety is also an experience. No one can tell you you can feel safe here. You have to be able to experience feeling safe. And so I appreciate that. Thank you so much for all the work that you do and are presenting today.
And thank you for
sharing. Yes,
sharing, because it brings me to the idea of allyship, and we'll be talking about that. There, you have individuals that have secret allyship because they're afraid of speaking up and being ostracized for speaking up, or not losing the privileges of association with dominant culture if they speak up, or the secrecy protects them for whatever reason. They can't speak up. And so when you do speak up in true allyship, yes, these things will occur where you're holding people accountable and you're living up to your accountability. And so people will say, to Anne-Marie and myself, it's not an easy thing to do. And I say to them, do you think it's easy to be living in this skin, in this society? Whoever said that this work was going to be easy? But how do we have courageous conversation and courageous true allyship? And does it mean that your circle will be reduced? Yes. But if this is the work, this is the work. And when I think about my foreparents 300-400 years ago, some who were killed for standing up, but they were willing to do that, and the ostracism, there's a lot to unpack in being true allyship. What is taken away, but we juxtapose that to lived experience. and the richness of your sharing. Thank you for that. Thank you very
Yes,
much for that.
yes, you
Thank
said
you.
that beautifully, Imani. And I wanted to say just being able to sit and being not uncomfortable, right? As you said,
Mhm.
living in the skin every day is living with being in on discomfort. So it is hard sometimes to have to sit in that discomfort. But it is a journey that we have to take if this work is going to be done,
It's going to be
right?
done. And
Yeah,
we need allyship. We
we
need
need.
allyship. So Anne Marie, we have 15 minutes. So
Okay,
the next 4
go
slides, we
ahead.
have to, yeah. And it's such a passionate
Mhm.
workshop for us that we could probably do an hour and a half to allow people to speak or just to feel and stay in the moment. I'm a fan of Dr. Ken Harding. I discovered him over 10, 12 years ago, and it really centered my work and my clinical work with all youth, not just racialized youth. And when I saw this definition that, racial oppression is a form of interpersonal violence, like communication violence, and it impacts on their mental health and well-being and function, that really resonated with me because I experienced that. And I didn't have the words for it, but for him to say that it's interpersonal, not verbal communication violence, that is something that we need to be able to help our youth and young people and even adults to understand. So the hidden wounds of racial violence, we'll put the article in the chat room, results in interpersonal, internalized evaluation, assaulted sense of self, internalized voicelessness, and wound of rage.
Okay, so if we look at the first one, the internalized devaluation, it is a direct byproduct of racism linked to the definition of whiteness and the demonization of non-white hues, right? It is perpetrated throughout our society, and racial devaluation is intertwined with other affronts to dignity, such as neglect, abuse, and rejection, right? And the behaviors would look as oppression and racist experiences, which reinforces not being valued, right? So again, we go back to not feeling valued, feeling disrespected. I mean, when we feel disrespected, we feel unvalued, right? That our opinion means nothing, that we mean nothing. I'm not of worth. I'm bad. I'll always cause trouble, right? The devalued youth becomes frustrated on gaining respect, right? Again, we go back to respect, right? And so, we see in schools that there's a disproportionate number of children of color who are failing, and they become trapped in the pipeline of treatment, right? And schools really don't understand what's going on for them. So they become, they end up in the justice system. And as Mani said, the question is not, the question's usually what's wrong with you and not what's happened to you,
Or
right?
why did you do that? Why did you do that? Right?
Mhm.
Instead of really listening to their experience and their pain.
Yeah.
So I'm going to move on to
On to the assaulted sense of self, right? And this is an accumulation of reoccurring experiences with internalized devaluation, right? Um, Continual exposure to external and social devaluation and shapes how youth of color see themselves, right? So this results in negative messages of self. It becomes challenging for them to develop a healthy sense of self. And when one's emotional and psychological identity is inundated with the repeated race-related messages, the following occurs. So, it's you're not as attractive, right? You're not as smart, you're too dumb, you're not intelligent enough. Um, you ain't ever going to be anything. You're not college material. One that's not here that I like to put in terms of, in the Black community is, and I'm not sure if anybody's heard this, you're nothing too Black is good, right?
oh,
we look at Black Friday, and there's negative connotations of Blackness, right? That's internalized, right? You look like a thug, you're a criminal, you're violent, you need to be watched. So it's those negative connotations of self that youth of color, soak in, they absorb every day, right? And it relates, it leads them to a devalued sense of self, that I'm not worthy, I don't belong, I'm not good enough. Right? Yeah.
And so, as Anne-Marie said, this devaluing messages sometimes occur around the most vulnerable stages of a life cycle development, which is adolescence, developing their sense of identity and who they are and their sense of belonging. So when you're in institutions where you don't feel like you belong or welcomed, how is any child to feel wanted and valued, and to really develop a sense of inclusion and being loved? And that really has that race-based stress that really impacts their mental health and well-being going forward into adulthood. So when youth are forming their identity, trying to figure out their place in the world, the devaluing messages experiences mental stress, leading to poor self-esteem and lack of positive outcome. And the behavior is that connecting, they don't know what a healthy relationship is. They don't feel safe. Institutions are not having these restorative kind of conversations or interaction with them, and often blamed for their behaviors. Internalized voicelessness. It's not that the youth does not have a voice, but if they feel that what they say is unjustified and not believed, from all the negative microaggressions that they're experiencing, and as I said, feeling unwelcome, they don't feel that they have the ability to be heard. It impairs their ability to advocate for themselves, because they give up. Well, I damned if I do and damned if I don't. If I say something, they're suspicious of me anyways. They're not going to believe me, right? They feel powerless from unfounded negative stereotyping and systemic racism. And the unfounded negative stereotyping is based in microaggression, microinvalidation, biases, implicit and explicit. And when, unfortunately, a lot of these things happen behind closed doors. And these youth are not believed that these things really happen. It's the adult voice versus the young person's voice, and worse, young person of color that's Indigenous or Black or racialized or from the LGBTQ community, right? So they're unable to defend themselves in institutions and society, and we wonder what's going on with them. So it impacts their mental health and well-being. Wound of rage. Right? Think about a Coke bottle or a pop bottle. You shake up, and then you take the lid off, right? So rage is not this dangerous, out of control rage. We're talking about generations of seeing foreparents not being able to get justice, not being believed. It's deep. It's emotional response to ongoing degradation, devaluation, right? And what does the behavior look like? It's complex. It's anger. It's explosiveness. Not explosiveness because they want to be violent and targeting people. It's not having anyone believing in them not feeling safe. So what's up? Sometimes that's the only outcome that they have. Think about that Coke bottle or that pot that's boiling with the lid that is shaking. Intense sadness. We see that. When we hear the term, what is it, Anne-Marie? The student is disconnected from school. That leads to lack of attendance, right? Yes. They're disconnected. How do we get them reconnected? When we see acting out depression is not necessarily sadness, is risky behaviors as well. So we do need people who are really experienced and have this language of mental health to understand these behaviors.
And that disconnectedness comes from that voicelessness, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So then how do we heal from this racial trauma, right? Because we're hoping to get on a journey of healing and to, at some point, be able to have our students have a voice, right? So healing, means allyship. It means connectedness. It means youth having a voice, right? Using their anger and their rage in a positive way, right? Feeling connected, feeling that they're in a community, becoming engaged, right? How do we get them to become engaged? Listening to them, showing empathy, right? Creating,
Creating safe spaces.
yes, I was going to
Creating,
say,
yeah.
accessibility to safe spaces and programs that are racially sensitive to their needs, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. Anything else that I might have missed?
Yes, and yeah, to stand again after they've been knocked down. How do
Yes.
we teach them really good adaptive coping skills to try again, or be role models to say,
Mhm.
look at us, we were knocked down quite a few times, but we kept on going, or to
Yeah.
provide that support. Anne Marie and I, we have clients, our students, when they see us in the hallway, they're in disbelief that we're actually social workers of color, that we're actually working with them. And so we often have to go through a stage of no, really, we are social workers. No, really, we're here to
Yeah.
work with you. But
Yeah.
to
And
teach
I'll,
them
yeah, sorry, I was going to share an experience I had at the start of September. I got a phone call from a student. And it was a student that I probably met in grade 3, not a student that I really worked with, but I do remember. And it's funny how you remember things. And she called me to say, you may not remember me, but I remember seeing you walk into my school one day when I was in grade 3, and she remembered me having on a suit for some reason. And she asked me who I was. And I said, I'm the school social worker. And she said, oh, okay. So she called me to say she wanted to let me know that she had finished her master's in social work and was starting to work with one of the other school boards, but she really wanted to thank me for being visible to her, to know that she too could do that she too could learn and get, complete post-secondary and to, as she put it, put her suit on. So she said to me, when I walk in on the first day of school in my suit, know that I will remember you.
oh, wow.
And this was grade 3. She was in grade 3 at the time.
That's
Right.
powerful, Anne Marie. Thank you for
Right?
sharing.
Yes. And so as you're speaking about that, I wanted to, share that because like you said, it is important for us to be visible to students.
And this speaks to culturally relevant resources and therapy, and in institutions, in treatment centers. We do know that it's a very Eurocentric base. A lot of agencies are trying to make that change and have their programs. And so how do we encourage parents to be trustful of these agencies when most of their lives they've distrusted institutions, right? How do we bridge that gap with these, culturally responsive agencies and help empower parents to really connect and engage on behalf of their students? And that's part of the work that we're hoping to do for positive outcomes of healing the hidden wounds of racial oppression and trauma for students.
So
Sorry, go ahead.
And no, I was going to say, just for them also to understand how resilient they are, right?
They can be, and that they're here after 300 years of being told that you're not human and you don't deserve freedom. So from many countries around the globe continent, they're examples of freedom fighters, and the intersectionality of race in our Latin countries, in our Portuguese countries, in our Caribbean and African countries, the freedom fighters are there. And that's how, Black history and racialized history should be steeped in resilience and the positive, rather than just pictures of a period in time. I have 1 more minute. I wanted to pay homage to, those greats like Dr. Carl James and George Day at OISE. They've done a lot of work of decolonializing curriculum and education. And so we'll put this in the chat. Please know that as social workers, we're coming from it from a mental health and well-being, social emotional perspective. And so we, it's very different, but, these resources are amazing. And these are the greats that we look up to. and wanted to pay homage to the work that they've done. And we want to thank you very much for being here with us and for sharing this workshop. And if you have any comments, please either unmute your mic or put in the chat. I see Samir saying just talking is not enough. We need to watch students, teachers, and administrators. Yes, whether they're applying or not. Yes, very political, but we need to teach students the steps, dispute steps that they can take to be heard.
That's true.
Yes. You know, and they're dispute processes, but we need to give the language of advocacy and mental health literacy to our children and to our young people. So if you get anything from today, I hope that that's it. There are a lot of people that seem, looking sad. You're right. Would love to see Black children looking happy. There's a problem when Black children are momentary happy in primary grades. If you guys have an opportunity, there's a concept in the American education system. You might have heard about it. It's the grade 4 failure syndrome for Black students, especially Black males. And it states that in general, grossly summarizing, by the time a Black student hits grade 4, they can predict if that student will end up in the prison to the school to prison pipeline.
Yeah.
And that they start feeling low self-esteem from grade 1, grade 2, and by grade 4, their test results will determine their failure and whether or not they will be on that pipeline. So there's a lot of studies in the States. I am always looking for ongoing research, and we need to educate our kids. The fact that this can be predictive. Yeah, it is, but we're here. I'm here in resilience. Anne-Marie, I've been doing this work for over 25 years. We need more social workers, child and youth workers, psychologists. We need racialized psychologists. We need racialized OTs and speech language therapists. I also want to say that community agencies such as CAFCAN, Taibu, Strides Toronto, CAMH, their Spacey program, Tropicana, which is their, the Spacey program is the mental health and addictions program. They have racialized workers. There's a youth outreach worker there that can be in the community. We need community-based workers. There are a lot of YOWs, youth outreach workers with agencies, and EYOWs. So
Tropicana, yeah.
Community services. So thank you very much. Have a great day. Thank you for attending.
Yes, very true and disturbing. Yes, thank you. Okay, any other? We're at the end. It's 3:33. I don't know if anyone else has any comments or anything that they'd like to share, but we'd like to thank you for taking time out of your afternoon to participate in this workshop. It's a Saturday. We know people have a lot to do, so we do appreciate your time. And we hope that it's been helpful and we've imparted some information to you that you can take back and work with.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Have a great afternoon. Thank you.
May I ask a question? It's just a little bit here. I'll come on camera. Hi.
Thank you, Gladys.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to ask, maybe it's you who can answer it, maybe not. How would one go about getting involved? I've been a therapist privately for 15 years, but I really feel called into the school system. So I'm not sure if there are organizations that, you know, I can get involved with in some way. The thing that really attracts me is this education into the schools about how to recognize feelings and what they need in order to be expressed. In my experience as a somatic therapist and what I teach my own kids, it's like it has to be identified and elevated and expressed, really. And I feel that's a lot of the oppression and depression and repression that everyone's experiencing. So I'm just curious if you know.
I'm putting both our emails in the chat. Anne-Marie, can you put your email in the chat? That's a long conversation based on your experience and your degrees. But then there's so many agencies that are doing things, but there's also a partnership agreement department with TDSB. You have over 15 years experience. We have a lot of yoga teachers. There is a person that does Black yoga for grief. And if you go onto the TDSB webpage and look for partnership department, maybe you can do an application to look at some of the programs you provide. And because with the partnership department, they really have to look at vulnerable sector checked. Is it going to be a safe program for a student? Once you have an agreement, then you can work in partnership with the support staff and the managers in TDSB. So there are many angles, but you know, yeah, check that out. And you know,
Thank you.
Anne-Marie, did you put your
I
email in the
did.
chat?
I'm not sure what's going on. I just
Okay.
I put it in.
I will
Let me do it
try.
again.
Is it
Yeah, perfect.
Anne-Marie?
Try again. I'm just copying them and saving them, and I may be in contact. Thank you.
Thomas.
And with an E.
Yeah, and with an E. I'm typing it in. -Marie.Thomas@tdsb.on.ca.
Yeah,
And
I'm putting it in, but it won't go in. Oh, thank you. It worked for you. Okay.
We've helped a
it.
lot of community individuals in the sense we love community partnership, but we do have to do it in a very safe way. And that, you know, everyone has that vulnerable, the TDSB has its process on behalf of the safety and well-being of our students. So yeah, there are many ways and it all depends on your experience, but that's a start. And thank you so much for contributing and telling us your story and wanting to do more and being a true ally. I appreciate that.
Thank you. I appreciate your work as well.
You're
Thank you.
welcome.
Have a great day.
Have a great day. Thank you.